Political censorship, the media, and losing freedoms we take for granted. A British resident offers a warning about troubling similarities between the UK, the US, and Minnesota. Next. Mark Burkes, a resident of the UK, is my guest. Thank you for joining me here, Mark.
Thank you, Liz. Pleasure to be here.
Just for background, before we get started, you reached out after watching my interview recently on the Tucker Carlson show. That's when you realized how things in Minnesota seem a lot like what's been happening in your country. Under the current political leadership in the UK, what has life been like? What are some of the warning signs for those of us here in America?
Well, the one thing I think a lot of people know is that freedom of speech in Europe generally and in the UK, in my experience, it's been eroded dramatically over the course of the last 10 years specifically, but really over the last 20 years. We've had 10 different statutes that have come into play since Tony Blair was in government back in the Bush era. All of them have eroded civil liberties. They've either curtailed free speech, normally using things like child safety, so child safety online, which obviously everybody is in favor of, but using, we must protect the children, or we must protect the populace, or we must stop hate speech because hate is suddenly illegal. I mean, it's not pleasant, obviously, but it is a human emotion. And as soon as you can't express it, or even anything which they judge to be hate speech, which is usually criticism of a political ideology or something that you see that you don't like as an individual. So they use those particular tactics, and they use them both in the UK and I see it in Europe, and I think I see it when I'm watching stuff from the States as well. They first of all, they separate you into groups. So you've got identity politics. Then they have to protect those groups, supposedly. Some groups more than other groups, sort of, Animal Farm comes to mind. And then at the end of it all, you end up with this pernicious effect where people are either scared to speak, or, and this is where we are in the UK at the moment, most people just aren't aware that they don't speak out for things that are important to them a lot of the time because they're worried that what they say might be unlawful. And there's something like, I think last year there were 30 people a week arrested for what is effectively speech crimes. Now, that's under legislation which includes as well things like online stalking and general nuisance stuff. So people sending unpleasant messages online to people and things like that. So it's not all political, but a lot of it is. And we've had lots and lots in the press recently where there's examples of pastors and ordinary people just having 6 policemen and 2 police cars rock up and arrest them, take them to the police station in front of the children, take them away, sometimes charge them, sometimes let them off with a caution, which of course goes on your record. It's all very worrying.
Yeah, and there are some similarities right there on your first thought, no doubt. I want to talk a little bit more about that as you're speaking to losing freedom becoming a reality for you and others in the UK. Share a little bit more about these stories, people being arrested for their social media posts. I know you have some more insights there, Mark.
We had some attacks on children. We get them quite regularly. But there were attacks on children last year in the summer. It was a very volatile atmosphere, and people were speculating on social media, on Twitter or X in particular, that the perpetrator of the attack, which was basically the stabbing of lots of little children in a play school, that perpetrator was said that they were a migrant, that they were Islamic, that it was a terror attack. All these things were speculated upon. That was made worse because the government just clamped down, wouldn't say anything. They wouldn't say who it was or anything else. We get a lot of stabbings in London and the UK generally every day, and lots of them end with Allahu Akbar. So, you make your decisions based on that. So a lot of people were getting very angry that the people in this country at the moment it's a very unpleasant atmosphere. And a lot of people said a lot of things they shouldn't have said. Some were outright insightful, or inciting. They were sort of saying, go and do this. We need to go and attack these people and everything else, which obviously is ridiculous and shouldn't be encouraged. Some people, there was a middle-aged mother of one who actually is I follow her on Twitter. She follows me, just an ordinary person. She's the wife of a local councillor, or the councillor at the time. And she is the most famous of these people. She tweeted something along the lines of a few profanities and basically, I'm sick of these people. There's lots of hotels filled with migrants here over in this country. And she said, you can burn down the hotels with them and the politicians in them for all I care. That was pretty much word for word what she said. Again, a stupid thing to say. She's very angry. She had a background. She'd lost a child, which mixes things up. She'd been diagnosed with PTSD, always. So she was very sensitive to the loss of children. She posted it for an hour. She went for a walk. She came back. She thought, that's not clever. She deleted it and apologized. But people had screenshot it. People that are on the left generally, reported her to the police. She was arrested. And this is really the pernicious part of it. Keir Starmer, who's the Prime Minister, he went on television that day or the next day to address the nation, to try, you would think, to pour oil on troubled waters. And instead, he just came out with all the talking points. We won't tolerate this, far right, we will clamp down hard. And then he also, and this is critical because it's against sort of our rules of law and the Constitution since the Magna Carta. He gave instructions that the courts would look very hard on whether or not they gave people arrested for things like tweets, whether they would get police bail after being charged, or whether they would go on remand in a jail, in a prison. And if they go on remand in a prison, at the moment, our prisons are full. I think we've got something like 1,000 spaces left in the entire nation. They're letting out rapists, they're letting out murderers, people that have macheted people to death. They let them out to let these people in, and they're still doing it. And so you can imagine if you're a middle-class, middle-aged woman, you've been arrested, you're in the police station, and you're being told, we're not letting you out of here, you're going to jail for 6 months either way, because the Prime Minister on television told us to do this. She got the advice, I suspect, look, plead guilty. She pleaded guilty to a law which is purposefully inciting racial hatred. That's from the quote, the tweet that I quoted you. She shouldn't have pleaded guilty, but I suppose she was scared. She was out of the comfort zone. She wanted to get out of the jail. She got 31 months in prison. She was in prison the next day. She's still in prison now, 31 months.
Let's talk more about that, the horrific Southport stabbings you're speaking about. These are 3 young girls who were stabbed and killed. 10 others were injured. Much like Minnesota, your mainstream media apparently tried to manipulate the facts in what seems like sympathy for the suspect. They reported that the teenage boy responsible was a young Welsh lad. But comparing the photos shown by the media and then the photo from his arrest tells a much different story. Much like the way the media manipulated, we know this all too well, the death of George Floyd, there's many more facts that they're withholding from the public in a case like this, Mark.
Exactly. Well, that's where we spoke, really, because I emailed you sort of saying exactly that. I watched and followed the George Floyd thing, which migrated all over the world. And we had it in the UK, we had riots. We had the Prime Minister now took a knee and had that photograph published all over national press. And our national football teams still take the knee to this day at international football games, which I find stunning. And we had this attack, which had all the normal attributes of a terror attack. A single attacker attacked a soft target, stabbed and slashed to death or close to death. Lots of little children, we're talking 4-year-olds, 8-year-olds, killed 3 of them. He was arrested. We later find out, 6 months later, that he was basically laughing and saying, "I'm glad that how many are dead," all this sort of stuff. He's obviously not entirely there. We were then first told, it was reported, there was a news blackout. It was reported that it was a Welsh, because of these people saying it's a migrant, it's an Islamic terrorist, people were speculating. And so because of this, the police originally came out and said, it's a Welsh lad, under 18, so a child. It's a Welsh child, he's in custody. And everyone was like, most people were, I don't believe that for a second. Then it's established, well, actually, yes, okay, he's a Somalian, but he was born in Britain. So he's born in Wales. So he's Welsh, but he looks a Somalian. His father and his mother came from Rwanda after the Rwandan troubles were taken in as after the Rwandan genocide. And then he has had, it then transpires, first of all, there's a photograph of him as a 10-year-old or 12-year-old boy in a school uniform, an angelic-looking little lad. He was the photograph they used in the press. And then after about several months, it came out when he was finally charged and going to go to court. He was found guilty of murder. He wasn't prosecuted under the terror laws. We've got 3 or 4 different terror acts now to cover all sorts of things, crimes of terror, which clamp down on our civil liberties. None of those were used against him, despite the fact that it's now been reported he had ISIS manuals in his bedroom, he had ricin poison in his bedroom, and it's since been reported, but I can't speak to this, that in prison he attends mosque. So all of this, and yet they didn't touch it. They did it for murder, and he got 52 years. He was a minor when he committed it, so 52 years he's been given. I suspect he'll be quietly let out at some point in the future. But I mean, you can imagine people were, first of all, they were right to speculate. They weren't exactly right. He wasn't specifically technically a migrant. It wasn't known at the time that he was committing a terror act. Subsequently it was. And yet people have been sent to prison for spreading misinformation when the Prime Minister himself spoke to the nation, denied all of this.
A rise in socialism is another parallel that can be drawn across the pond. A large percentage of the Labour Party in the UK has moved toward the Fabian Society, a socialist movement. In New York City and Minneapolis, we have mayoral candidates who belong to the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. The Fabian Society, rising socialism in the UK, are there warning signs that Americans should recognize and respond to, Mark?
I know in the USA, you've had a big problem with illegal immigration, and that's the obvious ambition of the left in the USA, as far as I can see as an outsider. They just want to get more and more people to vote for government handouts, subsidies. They're bribing people to vote for them, basically. The left are happy with it because they see the benefits. They're short-sighted because they're going to end up reaping the same whirlwind that everybody else does if we're not careful. But the left, they seem to have a track record of doing this. They'll pick on groups that they feel they can use. The LGBTQ is another one. They pick on sort of small groups. They use them to gain power, and then they discard them. The working class in Britain in the 1920s, that's where the Fabian Society was set up in about 1850. Karl Marx was in London, 1850 to 1895, something like that. So, they were in the same part of the same city doing the same sort of thing. And the Fabian Society's logo, their famous logo until very recently, was a wolf in sheep's clothing. That was the logo they had on all of their stationery and everything else. And they only changed it recently because it was kind of saying the quiet part out loud. So, yeah, that's a warning.
Yeah, on that note, what is the warning to Minnesotans? What would you like to say, the overall message? Just hearing your words, I think, is a bit of a wake-up call for anyone who takes a listen.
I think it's pernicious and you need to pay attention because the left use language very cleverly. So they will use hate speech to regulate all speech. They then define speech as hate speech if they don't like it. Try and see through the messaging and look at what they're doing. watch out for these tactics that I've mentioned, the fact that they use specific groups to either divide people or to gain power using them. Pay attention and either participate in politics at some level, or alternatively support those that are prepared to do it, and also support the non-corporate media, the media that's prepared to do the job of the journalist, people like yourselves. Because without free press, and I knew this, but I didn't realize it in my bones. And once you lose the free press, everything else goes. No one holds government to account. No one resigns from government when they're shamed, because why would they? Everything falls apart. So from the bottom of my heart, yes, watch out for that sort of thing, and just be aware of it because it's coming.
I think that last message certainly hits home in Minnesota about the media. But Mark Burkes, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate the time and sharing your very important perspective.
Thank you, Liz. Pleasure.
That will do it for this episode of Liz Collin Reports. We'll see you next time.